Hello and welcome to Cable 14's special presentation of the 38th Annual Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame induction ceremony. As many of you know, the CAHF works diligently to preserve and honor the legacy of Canadians who have led the way in developing our country's rich aviation history. This year's event is special for a number of reasons. The first is our host location. We're inside the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, an iconic symbol of aviation history in itself. And this is also the first time the museum has hosted this prestigious event. Another highlight is this year's list of inductees. 4 special Canadians are being recognized and will join the ranks of the other 200 individuals and organizations already in the Hall of Fame. So without further ado, let's turn our attention to the main event.
I'd now like to introduce our MC for this evening, Jackie Perrin.
Your involvement with the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, you're a member here.
I've been a member for many, many years because I really feel it's important to support our aviation heritage. You know, I'll be saying in my remarks tonight, the railroad opened Canada east to west, but it's aviation that opened the rest of the country. And to see some of these airplanes and to know their history, and certainly during the war years what these airplanes did, it's rich aviation history. We can't lose it. We have to keep these airplanes flying and teach young people about it, and also show great respect for those who did fly, which is very, very important.
Why tonight? Why, tonight's event is so special for...
Well, it's very special because the Aviation Hall of Fame was started in 1973, and if you look at the roster of members, it is a who's who of people in this industry. All the great bush pilots, the Watt May, the Punch Dickens, those who started the various airlines, James Richardson, the great Max Ward, who's still alive and doing well. I saw him recently. He's wonderful. All these great names in aviation are finally recognized and inducted into this Hall of Fame for all Canadians to see, and Americans, anybody in the world who's interested in aviation, to see these great names and to see what they have done for aviation in this country. To be here and to see some of these people and to chat with them and rub shoulders with them, for me, is a huge honor. I mean, in my career, I've met a lot of stars. But I'll tell you, I get starry when I meet some of these people.
Oh, really?
I really
the tables turn, do they?
Oh, really? Because the things they've done, I just truly admire, and I'm so thrilled to be part of this tonight. What a great venue we have here tonight, Canadian Warplane Heritage. And, most MCs don't like being upstage, but this beautiful beast can upstage me anytime. Isn't it gorgeous? And I'm sure, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, like many of you, when we saw the royal wedding recently and the Lancaster in the UK flew over, I felt great pride in saying, I know where the other flying Lanc is. It was really wonderful to see. We have a lot of things to do tonight, some wonderful videos. We're going to honor some really wonderful people. And the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame is certainly doing a great job in telling the story of our early aviators. And when I read the list of some of the names, and I think of Watt May and Punch Dickens and James Richardson and Vi Milstead, who was inducted, and the great Max Ward, I look at these names and I think, what an incredible roster we have of names who are part of the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame, and what a wonderful thing to actually honor them as this has been done. So I'm going to ask you please to rise as we invite in our grand entrance. Please welcome our 2011 inductees, along with Hall of Fame Chair John Holding, Vice Chair Tom Appleton, and Blaine Fowler, Chair of Operations Committee. Our thanks to the 400 Tactical Helicopter Squadron for our march-in this afternoon. Also our thanks to 779 Black Knight Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Cadets, under the command of Captain John McFarlane. Let's hear it for the Air Cadets. Well, the railroad linked Canada east to west, but it is aviation that opened the country far to the north, truly making Canada a nation sea to sea to sea, and extending her reach even into the universe. So let's have a look at our rich aviation history in A Passion for Flight. When J.A.D. McCurdy first took to the sky in a very fragile-looking Silver Dart on that cold February day in 1909, never could he have imagined the impact and the legacy of his work and that of the Aerial Experiment Association led by Alexander Graham Bell. We would love to have J.A.D. McCurdy with us. Well, we can't, but we have the next best thing. We have his grandson. I'm very pleased to introduce Gerald Hannon, grandson of J.D. McCurdy, and also Honorary Colonel, Canadian Forces School of Aerospace Technology and Engineering, 16 Wing Borden. Wouldn't Granddad be proud to hear that? Gerald.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a singular honor to have been invited to attend this evening's 38th annual induction ceremony of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. I stand before you tonight deeply humbled. That is a rare privilege to be asked to make these award presentations to such an esteemed group of individuals. The dedication of your collective talents and the vital roles you have fulfilled have proven to be of outstanding benefit to Canadian aviation. Each of our new inductees has followed the teachings of Aristotle, who believed that excellence is an art, won by training and habituation. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Each of you stands at the vanguard of excellence. The journey all began when my grandfather, John Alexander Douglas McCurdy, as an associate of the Aerial Experiment Association, shook loose the frozen bonds of Bredor Lake on February the 23rd, 1909, when he made the first controlled flight of an aircraft by a British subject anywhere in the British Commonwealth, from Bedeque, Nova Scotia, in a fragile airplane he designed and built called the Silver Dart. In doing so, he unleashed the power of man to thrill, shock, elevate, and set Canadians free from the pull of gravity. He placed his hand on the arc of history and bent it towards this emerging nation age of flight. During the last few years, I have met and been approached by many people, from aerospace engineers to World War II veterans, from snowbird pilots to air cadets, from 6-year-old schoolgirls and boys to ordinary, everyday Canadians, many of whom have conveyed their conviction that J.E.D. McCurdy is one of Canada's true heroes. I have felt their passion and pride, their love and admiration for this man of destiny. I have been touched and moved in ways I cannot describe. In 1959, the then chairman of the National Geographic Society, Gilbert Grosvenor, wrote that he had known Lindbergh, Amundsen, Byrd, Perry, and Shackleton, and he stated, "I regard J.E.D. McCurdy as a man who ranks with the very greatest of these." Our cherished nation continues to produce people and organizations who have accepted the challenge of pushing the boundaries of aviation. As I reflect on tonight's inductees, on Canada's aviation pioneers, and on my grandfather's achievements, I am reminded of the words of Sir Isaac Newton. "If I have seen further, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants." Every important idea begins with a dream. Always remember we have within us the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Tonight, we celebrate your hallowed feats and acknowledge that your contributions have helped maintain Canada at the forefront of worldwide aeronautical excellence. May I take this opportunity to offer my heartfelt congratulations to our new members. Canada is immensely proud of you. Thank you.
Well, the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame was founded in 1973. Its roster of inductees includes the who's who in our aviation history. And it celebrates and honors the pioneers and those who have contributed so much over 102 years. Let's take a look. like to recognize some of the Hall of Fame members who are with us tonight, and I will ask you please to stand. Hold your applause, folks, and I'd like to introduce some of these people. George Neal, Barry Marsden, Byron Cavadius, Dick Richmond, Rosella Bjornsson, Robert Bradford, Larry Milbury, Bill Carr, Fred Hodson, Russell Bannock, Don Watson. And did I miss anyone who is a member that we don't have your name? Anyone else here? Big applause, ladies and gentlemen. These are some of your members of the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame. Thank you for being here. The Belt of Orion Award was established in 1988. It honors associations, groups, societies, or those who have made outstanding contributions to the advancement of aviation in Canada, including Canadian Warplane Heritage, one of the recipients. So this wonderful building has received the Belt of Orion, as did the 99s and the Snowbirds and other great organizations. Well, tonight we honor Hollinger-Ungava Transport, which operated from 1948 to 1954 in northern Quebec and Labrador. Here's its story.
Hollinger-Ungava Transport was a unique company airline service established for a special purpose. It existed to support the construction of the Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railway to transport iron ore by rail from the mine to the shipping port. The airline operated from 1948 to 1954, carrying supplies and personnel until its task was completed. Hollinger-Ungava Transport, HUT, was an airline that used mainly Douglas DC-3 aircraft that were veterans of the Second World War to build another transportation system, a special purpose railroad. Like the aircraft themselves, 3 of the first 4 pilots were Royal Canadian Air Force veterans of the Second World War. Tommy Griffith, Jack Scott, and Operations Chief Charlie Hoyt were joined by the younger John Timmons. And Chief Pilot Wes McIntosh was hired after serving with the Royal Canadian Air Force during the war. The railroad would run 580 kilometers from the port at Seven Islands, better known as Sept-Îles, to Knob Lake, now known as Schefferville. And the railroad would carry iron ore from the mine to the port of Sept-Îles on the Gulf of St. Lawrence for shipment to steel mills in Canada and the United States. Starting in 1948, the intention was to complete the railroad and deliver ore by 54 to the Sept-Îles port. Montjoly, Quebec, across the Gulf of St. Lawrence, served as the airline's main operating and maintenance base, where a well-equipped airport had served the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan and the RCAF during the war. And a dozen rugged and basic airstrips from Montjoly to Knob Lake were used where equipment, supplies, and personnel were carried primarily by dependable DC-3s during the construction of the Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railway. Starting in 1948, with 2 reconditioned DC-3s, HUT eventually operated a fleet of 10, as well as other types of aircraft, ranging from bush planes on floats to contracted aircraft on skis, to a Canso that served as a tanker aircraft carrying gasoline and diesel fuel for ground-based equipment used at the airstrips. At its peak, HUT averaged 70 flights per day, using 80 pilots with crews that flew an average of 1,000 to 1,200 hours per year. Staff included experienced mining personnel and pilots with extensive Air Force and bush experience, to seasonal pilots like Vic Bennett, who flew between university terms, and in 2006 and 2007 served as chairman of the board for Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Ground crew and support staff were vital to the operation of the airline, which flew day and night, 7 days a week. And even after hunting in remote Labrador, any self-respecting pilot would want to comb his hair before having his picture taken. Maintenance and repairs were done mainly at the Montjoly facility, but carried out on site when necessary. Over 100 mechanics, radio operators, and other technicians were among the large supporting staff that kept the aircraft flying. With long winters, blowing snow, poor runway lighting, and often low visibility, flying was always a challenge in the northern areas. Hollinger on Gava Transport was soon supporting 7,000 men on the railroad project, and the DC-3s were carrying cement for the building of a dam 30 miles from Knob Lake, which provided electrical power and served as a bridge for ore trains. HUT continued to provide support, and by the end of 1953, over 1,000 people were working at the Burnt Creek mine near Knob Lake. And as the railroad neared completion, additional aircraft from the RCAF and other airlines were brought in to assist with transport. It has been written that HUT is remembered for its pilots and co-pilots and the shiny Douglas DC-3 aircraft. But without the radio technicians, aeromechanics, freight handlers, dispatchers, the communications personnel, and many others in less glamorous jobs, success would not have been achieved. The airline met its objective with an enviable safety record while flying over 55,000 hours from 1948 to 1954, and in over 24,000 flights carried 163 million pounds of cargo. With air support from HUT on February 17, 1954, the last spike was driven to complete the Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railroad. By July 1954, the railroad was operating 9 trains each day, carrying iron ore from the mine near Schefferville to the port at Sept-Îles. Ore, by 54, had become a reality.
Listen to me, sing you a song about our North Country, a song of the men who broke through Labrador, bound north to Ungava for that rich iron ore. By July 1954, in Quebec's northern wilderness, few men had trod to the rich iron ore had been found in its sod. To get out that treasure, brave engineers swore and blast out a railway until Labrador by July 1954.
And accepting the Belt of Orion Award for Excellence is Mr. John Timmins of Toronto, one of the first 4 pilots hired by Hollinger on Gava Transport. Also, Mr. Wes McIntosh of Oakville, who was hired by HUT as a chief pilot. He's now 97 years young, and he's with us tonight. How wonderful. So John Timmins, Wes McIntosh, this is for you.
Colonel Hannon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Hall of Fame, it is with great pleasure and pride that I accept the Belt of Orion for Hollinger and Gava Transport. I accept it on behalf of its former chief pilot, Wes McIntosh, who's sitting right over there. And I also accept it on behalf of all those who at one time formed part of Hollinger and Gava Transport. The Hollinger story is not just a story about pilots. It is a story about people in aviation, like most of us that are here this evening. They were pilots, they were air engineers, there were technicians, and there were dispatchers, radio operators, loaders, fuelers, and many other trades. We all came together almost overnight and worked for nearly 6 years, often under difficult conditions, to provide complete air support for the construction of a 380-mile railroad from the north shore of the St. Lawrence from the north shore of the St. Lawrence into the Angava region of Labrador, a region that was known as the land that God gave to Cain. In its time, Hollinger was ranked as the world's largest civil airlift. I met Captain Wes McIntosh 63 years ago. He had just joined the company as a chief pilot, and I, having just turned 20, was, I'm sure, the greenest co-pilot he had ever seen. And I must admit that on that first day, as I buckled myself into the DC-3 with him, I was a little concerned. But that soon passed as I came to realize that I was flying not only with a superb pilot, but an excellent teacher and a most understanding and very fine person. In the years that lay ahead, I would fly with Wes countless times, as did many young pilots that would follow. Most of them would go on to have successful careers, flying careers, thanks in no small way to him, thanks to the training that they received from him. An organization with the operating dynamics of Hollinger had to have strong leadership, or it might well have failed. We were not lacking. Charlie Hoyt was our leader, and he ran a tight ship. Jack Scott was his number 2. John Luty and later Adrien Blachette were his chief engineers, and Wes was his chief pilot. Charlie never pushed us to our limit, but never beyond. He was tough as well as compassionate, and if necessary, he would back us to the hilt. Charlie and Scotty died some time ago. Had they been here this evening, they would have been very, very proud. Hollinger Angava Transport was the first airline to fully support the building of a railroad. And sadly, it became the first airline to be put out of business by a railroad. But then that had always been the plan. Wes and I were there at the end. It was a beautiful, sunny, minus 52-degree day at Knob Lake. The last spike was driven in. A loud train horn echoed across the frozen tundra, and a large locomotive moved slowly forward, signifying that the end of the line had been reached. 4 by 54, the battle cry of the project had been achieved. As all of this unfolded, I remember thinking, it's all over. Will anyone ever remember? As Wes and I and Vic Bennett leave here this evening, we leave knowing that thanks to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame, the Hollinger story has now been delivered into the annals of history, where it will remain forever, thus allowing Canadians and others to learn what one small Canadian air carrier accomplished and what a great industry Canadian aviation is. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and your directors for making this all possible. I also want to thank the Hall's administration, in particular its curator, David Crone, and historian, John Chalmers, and Rosella LaJoranson, who have been so helpful to us. Before I step down, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask my chief pilot to rise so that you can all see what a good pilot looks like.
You've seen the Belt of Orion video, and it was quite amazing. We're now going to look at the incredible career of inductee, the late Richard Ryan.
Starting as a pilot during the First World War, Richard Ryan later continued his association with aviation as a flying instructor, airline company administrator, and then as manager of a British Commonwealth Air Training Plan station during the Second World War. In over 20 years of service with Canadian Pacific Airlines, he helped develop the company's international service. Richard Dick Ryan was born in Huron County, Ontario, on November 11, 1896, and attended a one-room school at Niall, Ontario, near Goderich. In 1916, while attending the University of Toronto, he enlisted for infantry training in the First World War with the University Officers Overseas Training Corps, and in 1917 answered a call for volunteers to serve in the Royal Naval Air Service, but upon arriving in England, he transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. The primitive Farman Shorthorn gave Dick his first flying experience, and with the rank of lieutenant in the RFC, he was soon flying the Sopwith Pup from the training base at Thetford. At age 20, he had earned his pilot's wings in the Royal Flying Corps and was then posted to RFC No. 66 Squadron in France. The squadron was equipped with the famous Sopwith Camel aircraft, which Dick soon mastered in regular and aerobatic performance. Posted to Italy with his Camel, Dick wrote on the back of this photograph, "I am in my own machine. Note the guns in front." While in Italy, Dick Ryan survived a mid-air crash in his Sopwith Camel and landed safely with the propeller missing and the engine not working. Dick survived the crash, physically uninjured, but was hospitalized to recover from the trauma, then returned to flying as an instructor. His photographs from the First World War provide a rare look at early flying machines and the aviators who flew them, such as the rare single-seater Bristol monoplane designed in 1916, one of the first aircraft to use only a single wing. One of Dick's priceless photos shows Lieutenant Jock Palmer, who would become known as the grandfather of Alberta aviation and who was inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame in 1988. Before the First World War was over, the Royal Air Force had been formed, and Dick was now an officer in the RAF and trained on float planes while his return home was delayed. So in 1919, he signed up for a British expeditionary force, sailing on the HMS Narana, carrying ferry seaplanes to Murmansk, Russia, north of the Arctic Circle. The expedition was short-lived with little flying, but provided Dick the opportunity to take pictures in northern Russia, including this group he described as a lineup of Bolshevik prisoners in 1919. Dick Ryan returned to Canada in 1919 as a member of the No. 1 Squadron of the Canadian Air Force. When the Royal Canadian Air Force was formed in 1924 and offered him a commission, he declined, having finished a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Toronto and starting a new career in teaching, first in a small rural Saskatchewan school and then with Ross Collegiate in Moose Jaw. In 1924, Dick Ryan and Marjorie Breton were married in Moose Jaw after first meeting in 1922. Back in the air, he earned his instructor's license and became the instructor for the Moose Jaw Flying Club. And in 1930, he served as events manager for the city's first air show, a resounding success that saw 15,000 people coming to watch the performance of 28 aircraft. In 1930, Marjorie and Dick became parents, and in 1931, he became manager of the Moose Jaw Flying Club. In 1932, Dick completed a Master of Arts degree from the University of Alberta. In 1937, the Moose Jaw Flying Club formed a charter company, Prairie Airways Limited, and Dick Ryan became a director. Within 2 years, the new company needed a full-time manager and hired Dick, who then resigned from teaching after 15 years in the classroom. During the Second World War, Prairie Airways formed Prairie Flying School Limited to operate No. 3 Air Observer School at Regina for the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Dick Ryan became the manager, and as civilian manager of No. 3 Air Observer School was in charge of the school's operations at Regina and at Pierce, Alberta, until the school closed in 1943. When the Air Observer School closed, Dick began work with Canadian Pacific Airlines as supervisor of Western operations and was soon appointed General Superintendent of Western Lines to consolidate service. Working with President Grant McConaughey, who was inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame in 1974, Dick worked at expanding routes nationally and internationally. Starting with Douglas DC-3 aircraft for passenger service in Canada, the airline soon needed larger aircraft for service across the Pacific to Europe and Central America, and Dick Ryan was involved in providing service for travelers to reach new and faraway destinations for the airline. In 1951, Dick was appointed as Vice President of Canadian Pacific Airlines, and he was there when the company moved into the jet age in 1961 with its first Douglas DC-8 jetliners. Dick retired in 1961, staying on the board of directors until 1965, moving to Penticton, British Columbia, where at the age of 92 in 1988, he enjoyed seeing a Sopwith Camel replica, an aircraft he had flown as a young pilot with the Royal Flying Corps over 70 years earlier. Dick Ryan died on November 17, 1992, at his home in British Columbia, predeceased by Marjorie in 1984 and survived by his daughter, Beverly.
Well, as we saw in the video, the late Richard W. Ryan served in 2 world wars, then went on to be Vice President of Canadian Pacific Airlines. And representing him tonight is his granddaughter, Margie Johns of Victoria, British Columbia.
This is an incredible honor. I'm going to speak from the heart because, I'm his granddaughter, and I don't really, it's a shameful thing to say, but I know very little about aviation. And yet, I heard the stories, and it's such a miraculous thing, aviation, to think of Mr. McCurdy and his grandson here today. And I'm sure that my grandfather actually was probably inspired by such aviation. And as many of you are too when you talk about history and who inspires you. And so thank you for this honor tonight. My mother was not well enough to come. She and I are the sole survivors of my grandfather. We come from only children, small families. So thank you. I'm sorry there are not more of us to represent tonight, but that's the way it is. And so this is an amazing museum. I had the chance to tour it this morning. What a spectacular honor to be here and see this. You should all be proud of the gorgeous planes that are here, and I'm sure in other aviation museums across Canada. And so it's a huge journey to learn about aviation. I'm thankful to many guides that have shown me tonight and spoken. And I have some big thanks out here. I think John Chalmers, who I've been talking to and by email throughout the whole thing, and who I just met tonight, don't you think he's done some spectacular arrangements tonight with the posters in the back, first of what I saw, yes, and the presentations here, and also in your program. So thank you, John. I think you should stand up, because that was a huge, huge contribution. I'm also very thankful for, I'm Bill now, and I'm getting Cameron. I'm sorry, Bill. And I just met him tonight, too, and he nominated my grandfather, in addition to actually people before that. Ray Crone, the late Ray Crone, and his son is here tonight, David Crone, were very active in nominating my grandfather. And amongst several, and Rex Turpening seconded the nomination. So I'm very thankful to him, and he's quite senior, and what a wonderful person to support him. And another huge person I had the chance to meet is Ted West, and he's living in Victoria and couldn't make it tonight. He was just not quite well enough, but would love to have been here. And people I have not met, and if you're here tonight, I'd like to thank you. Peter Maw, these all wrote supporting letters. I understand a Mr. Baker was also very supportive and wrote a letter. Hal Wyatt and Clark Seaborn. And if I've missed any of you, it's because I'm sorry, I just didn't know. But thank you very much for all your contributions in supporting my grandfather at this stage. And so he has died in 1992. He lived a very long life. At times, I think his life was at risk because he was a bit of a risk taker. And maybe you have to be a risk taker to be a pilot. And one of the first stories he told me about was in the war, and how he thought it was a good thing that, well, if I'm going to survive as a pilot in the First World War, I need to get myself well trained. And, well, I understand you didn't get a lot of well training when you were in the early years of learning how to fly. And so he went up in his planes, he followed what his commanding officers said, but once he got beyond that training session, he went out and said, well, I've got to learn how to stunt and learn how to make maneuvers in case, I get fired upon. And so he learned how to do loops and all the things that these stunt pilots do in his training for the First World War. And so that helped him along. And he flew the Sopwith Pup, I believe is what it was called, and actually tried to do some stunting in that. And actually, I gather the way the fuel drains when you go up high, it kills the engine. He did this 3 times and landed in a farmer's field just before he was to go out to war. And I understand there were some very pretty women that lived in that farmhouse, and so that was his excuse to do this. Anyway, I have one other story to tell you about, because this sort of brings the old to the new. And my grandfather was born in the late 1800s and lived to 1992. So he actually lived through the start of the computer age, in our household anyway, which was in late 1989. And my husband is a retired computer manager, and he really knew a lot about computers and nothing about flying. And he'd bought a flight simulator package, and this was in the late 1980s. And he could not get that plane off the ground. And so he thought, well, I'll get Dick, in here, and we'll see what he can do. My grandfather had never used a computer. So, here were 2 people face to face, with their expertise. Well, my grandfather really showed them up. And it's really quite a humorous story that my husband tells, and I walked in on it later. And he evidently, all he had was a mouse and the keyboard, and my husband sort of briefly said something about that. Well, I think he chose something like a Sopwith Pup, maybe whatever was in there, maybe it was a camel. And he basically took started his flight and took it up, and not only did he land it perfectly, but he also did all the stunting. And when I walked into the room, I could see my grandfather, going from side to side, and here he was in this simplified flight simulator, and his feet were going up and down. And I said, Grata, that's what I called my grandfather, by the way, it was Grata. What are you doing with your feet? And he said, oh, that's just like what you have to do when you're flying these primitive airplanes. And he was stomping the ground. So, I'm just thrilled, and our family is just hugely thankful tonight for everybody here and all their contributions. And if I've missed somebody, it's because I'm so nervous up here. But thank you to all of you. And thank you to our aviators, whether they're from, a while ago to the current ones today, maybe the cadets that brought us in tonight. Thank you. And it's just to those who have fought in our wars. My father flew in the Lancasters and the Halifaxes, to the people that fly today serving our country. Thank you, and for being such great aviators and contributing to Canada's history. Thank you.
We've looked at some of our inductees, indeed. Now a visionary and innovator. You can't talk about the development of NAV Canada without talking about John W. Crichton.
Although a licensed pilot himself, John Crichton early in his career learned that his strength was in management. With a particular interest in expanding air service in northern Canada, he became involved in airline policy development, leading to the establishment of NAV Canada as the country's air navigation services provider, regarded as one of the best in the world. Born in Ottawa in 1946, John Crichton was one of 6 children in the family and developed a passion for aviation from his father, Harold, who served as a flying instructor with the RCAF in Canada during the Second World War. While managing the Ottawa Flying Club, John earned a commercial pilot's license, then gave up journalism studies to fly for Bradley Air Services Limited. In 1973, Bradley formed a new operation, First Air, and John was hired to establish new commercial routes and lead expansion of air services across the north. John developed regular air service from Iqaluit in the eastern Arctic, introduced jet service from Ottawa, and expanded routes across northern Canada. As Executive Vice President of First Air in the 1980s and early 1990s, John became well known in the Canadian airline industry, regarded as a guiding force behind expansion of air service in the north. He was the face of First Air in the north, visiting Arctic communities to work closely with customers and creating new services to northern Canada. In 1994, John left First Air to become President and CEO of the Air Transport Association of Canada. In that capacity, he was influential on government policy and was a key advisor to Transport Canada during negotiations that led to the Canada-US Open Skies Agreement, which provides increased service for passengers and cargo between Canada and the United States and delivery to a third country. As President of the Air Transport Association of Canada, John spearheaded the privatization of Canada's air traffic control and navigation services. He brought together the diverse interests of government, the commercial aviation industry, unions, general aviation, and Canada's investment community in the creation of NAV Canada. In 1997, John Crichton became President and CEO of NAV Canada, and has built the corporation into one recognized as one of the most modern and efficient air navigation systems in the world. The corporation now has 4,900 employees at 130 staffed sites across Canada. It is the country's civil air navigation services provider, delivering air traffic control, flight information, weather briefings, aeronautical information services, airport advisory services, and electronic aids to navigation. Innovations developed by the corporation include the Northern Radar program and in-house development of air traffic management systems. Recently introduced is an air traffic surveillance system called ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. ADS-B provides benefits for aircraft transiting airspace over Hudson Bay, expanding the capacity for a huge airspace. ADS-B is a GPS-based system that is particularly effective in remote locations and can be installed at a small fraction of the cost of radar. NAV Canada began deploying the system over the vast Hudson Bay region, an area of 250,000 square nautical miles, flown by several international routes. NAV Canada is one of the only fully private air navigation services in the world. In 2001 and again in 2010, NAV Canada was given the Eagle Award from the International Air Transport Association to recognize the best air navigation system provider. Under John's leadership, NAV Canada has built a global reputation for safety, efficiency, and a wide-ranging program that has seen the company's technology sold on a commercial basis to other air navigation providers. In-house engineering and development talent working with operational employees in the field continues to develop NAV Canada's own systems. These include transoceanic air traffic control systems and an automated tower terminal electronic flight strip system and touchscreen electronic technology. Such developments have been sold to other air navigation service providers on 3 continents: North America, Europe, and Australia. In 2006, NAV Canada received the J.A.D. McCurdy Award from the Air Force Association of Canada for the company's outstanding achievements in the field of civil aviation in Canada. And in 2006, John Crichton was honored as Transportation Person of the Year by the Transportation Association of Canada for contribution to the air transportation industry. In 2008, he received the Glenn A. Gilbert Memorial Award from the Washington, D.C.-based Air Traffic Control Association for lifelong achievement in aviation. In 2009, he was awarded the C.D. Howe Award from the Canadian Aeronautics and Space Institute for contributions to our aviation industry. John has been described as showing vision and boldness in pioneering new routes and technology which transformed the North, and made contributions to advancing air services and thereby enhancing the economic, social, and political development of the North, by bringing air service to remote locations in northern Canada that are not served by road or rail. To help ensure accuracy and safety in aviation services, NAV Canada uses 3 flight inspection aircraft to conduct ongoing verification and calibration of ground-based navigational aids, and to check the accuracy of newly designed approaches and isolate the causes of frequency interference or system outages. The National Post has described NAV Canada as a shining example of how to create a global technology leader. John Crichton is regarded as a skilled and effective manager with a deep understanding of the airline industry and the ability to bring parties together for a common purpose.
Well, as we saw in the video, John Crichton's work affects all of us who fly as pilots or passengers. NAV Canada is admired worldwide for its innovations and services. I introduce to you Mr. John W. Crichton. Please welcome him. And NAV Canada, come on. Big hand.
Well, good evening, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. And let me say how honored I am to be among this evening's inductees to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. And I, too, would also like to express my appreciation for all the careful planning and obvious hard work that goes into an evening such as this one. Your dedication to aviation is very much in evidence in every detail of this event. It is the key to its success and bodes a bright future for the Hall itself. With that in mind, I would like to thank the Board of Directors, the Selection Committee, the staff, and all the volunteers who helped to organize this year's induction ceremony. I would also like to thank those in the industry who conceived, prepared, and supported my nomination. This means so very much to me. And allow me to congratulate my fellow inductees and to say that I am doubly honored to be named to the Hall of Fame along with such a group of illustrious aviation pioneers. I also cannot think of a better way to honor those I have worked with throughout my career than through this special recognition by our colleagues in the aviation industry, a recognition I find both satisfying and humbling. For all of tonight's winners, and for all of those who have built and continue to build the aviation industry in Canada, I think we all know none of us are the singular authors of our achievements. We did it together as a team. In this spirit, I would like to thank all of the people I have worked with over the years for the decisions you have made, for the actions you have taken, and above all, for your love of aviation and for the vision you shared with me of what we could accomplish together. Now, no one has shared these visions and been more tolerant of the consequences of realizing them than my wife, Linda. Thank you, Linda, for your presence here and for your unfailing support through the years. And I'd also like to thank my children, Michael, Mark, David, and Jennifer, who are also here with me tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the many members of the NAV Canada executive team who are in attendance. As well, there is a contingent of NAV Canada people responsible for managing the airspace and air navigation facilities in the busy Toronto Flight Information Region, which takes in most of this province of Ontario. And I would like to note the presence of several NAV Canada board members, past and present, as well as other industry colleagues involved in the company who took the time to be here. But finally, I want to make a special mention for all the employees of NAV Canada, the company I am so proud to lead as we head towards our 15th anniversary later this year. NAV Canada people are the best in the world at what they do, and as many in the industry and the media have come to realize. And so I offer my heartfelt thanks to all NAV Canada people for everything you have done and are doing to stay ahead of the curve in service, safety, and technology. Whatever challenges might come our way, I know you can be counted on to keep moving the company forward. I promise the organizers I would be brief, so let me thank them again for this memorable honor. And to all of you here, I wish you a great evening, and as always, safe flying. Thank you very, very much.
Well, our next inductee, still flying after all these years. Let's look at the life and the air times of Donald Hamilton.
In a lifetime spent in aviation, Don Hamilton began with training in the Royal Canadian Air Force. With the purchase of his first small aircraft, he became an entrepreneur in the aviation industry. Starting with charter service and bush flying, as a businessman, he eventually built Airspray 1967 Limited into a leading fleet operation in aerial fire suppression. Born in 1924 on his grandparents' farm in Ontario, Don Hamilton was raised in rural Saskatchewan in the hamlet of Tilney, where his father operated a grain elevator and his mother ran a general store and the post office. And like many boys growing up in the prairies, Don played hockey on an outdoor rink. When he graduated from high school, at age 18, he signed up with the King's Own Rifle Regiment of Canada in 1942, and in 1943 transferred to the Royal Canadian Air Force, reporting to No. 3 Manning Depot in Edmonton, where he was selected for aircrew training, earning a bomb aimer's wing in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan and graduating as a pilot officer in 1944. The war ended before Don could be shipped overseas for service, so at the Moose Jaw Flying Club, he earned a private pilot's license, and with only 18 hours in a Tiger Moth, Don went to Wichita, Kansas for delivery of his first aircraft. With a new Cessna 120, Don Hamilton was launched into a lifetime of aviation business. But his days as a barnstormer ended abruptly when he walked away from a crash of his overloaded Cessna. And he showed his mechanical aptitude by rebuilding the aircraft and earned an AME license. Back in business with the little Cessna, he equipped it with skis and floats, hauling fish and passengers. As Don's bush flying and charter work increased, a Cessna 195 and an Avro Anson were added to his operations. And a Stinson 108 was acquired to use in aerial survey work to locate a site for what would become the Cold Lake Canadian Forces Base. With the base completed, Don used his Anson to fly freight and passengers from Cambridge Bay in the Cold War during construction of the Distant Early Warning Line in the 1950s. And he was the first to land on wheels at the Dew Line airstrip on King William Island inside the Arctic Circle. With his work finished on the Dew Line, Don next operated a repair and maintenance service, offering charter service, selling Helio and Dornier aircraft, and established Hamilton Aviation. He continued hauling fish in northern Alberta and acquired a Fairchild 82 to carry bigger loads. It was sold to Grant McConaughey for Canadian Pacific Airlines, which eventually donated it to the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum at Ottawa, where it resides today. Hamilton Aviation operated from a hangar at Edmonton City Centre Airport until Don built his General Aviation Centre at the airport in 1987. Ever the entrepreneur, in 1969, Don Hamilton became a partner in Airspray 1967 Limited, helping launch the company into forest fire suppression. It had a Douglas B-26 Invader bomber converted to carry fire retardant. Don himself flew a Cessna 310 as a bird dog to lead the bomber into firefighting areas. Additional B-26 aircraft were obtained for use in Alberta, the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon, and in 1972, Don bought out his partner. In 1974, operations moved to a wartime hangar at the Red Deer Industrial Airport, which was formerly the home of a British Commonwealth Air Training Plan station at Penhold, Alberta. By 1990, Airspray was operating 15 B-26 Invaders, 3 Canadair 215s, 2 Cessna 340s, 3 Aerostars, and a Cessna Citation executive jet. Staff had grown to 60 pilots, support, and maintenance personnel. Moving to replace piston aircraft, Don Hamilton selected the Lockheed Electra L-188, powered by 4 turboprop engines. 8 of them, accompanied by 8 Gulfstream twin-engine turboprop aircraft for bird dog duty, comprised the largest such fleet in North America. As a sideline, from 1999 to 2005, the company operated an F-86 Saberjet to tow targets for military aircraft at the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range. Airspray Limited has been recognized in the aviation press with stories of the company's operations and innovations in national and international coverage, with articles about Airspray's development as the company has grown over the years. And the published stories have helped to make the company's success widely known in the aviation industry, telling the story of how an Alberta company has given new life to vintage warbirds in modern aerial fire suppression. In 2000, fire destroyed the company's wartime hangar at Penhold, claiming the life of one of Airspray's engineers, Don's cherished Cessna 120, and 5 other aircraft. But Airspray recovered when Don built a 97,000 square foot hangar on the same site in 2001, operating today with 60 employees. During summer months, some 40 pilots are added, and in the winter, many stay on to fly charter service. Don married his wife, Georgine, in 1958, and they raised 2 daughters, Lynn and Janice. Georgine, a nurse, passed away in 1995. Lynn now serves as president of Airspray 1967 Limited, with Don as CEO. He continues to be active in the business, working from his Edmonton office and still flying, 65 years after earning his private pilot's license.
Well, at 87, he's still flying, and just recently took his IFR refresher. And his company, as we saw, the president is his daughter, Lynn, was involved this past week in the fight against the devastating fires that destroyed much of the town of Slave Lake. The company continues, as does Donald T. Hamilton. Please welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Before I like to, a bit about how I ended up here today, I would like to acknowledge some very important people in my life. First, my wife, Jean, who passed away several years ago. She was with me through both the good times and the tough times in my aviation business, and I wouldn't have achieved the things I have without her. I would also like to acknowledge my two daughters, Janice and Lynn, who are here this evening with their families. And if you people would just stand up, and there's there's a total of 8 grandchildren there. So. Finally, I'd like to thank my friends and colleagues who are here this evening, those who have supported me in my nominating for this honor. Thank you very much. Now, before I begin, for 60 years I've been able to tell everyone my job was to fly airplanes. What a thrill. As a kid, I dreamed about flying. Sometimes back in the 1930s, my parents would let me stay up at night to watch the lights of a first airmail navigate over a little prairie town near Regina, from one lighted beacon to the next one. I think that most of you folks, some of your older people here would know what a beacon is. It's not the ADF beacon, and not the Adcock range beacon, or the VOR beacon, or the GPS beacon. It was a beacon that used to, from 30 miles away, it was a rotating beacon. They'd fly from one airplane, one beacon to the other. And this was a VFR operation at night. So, and as a little kid, I used to stay up and watch the airplanes go over. So, then in the early 40s, I was thrilled to see the Harvard training planes fly over our house. It was one of these events that formed my passion for aviation. So how did I end up flying for 65 years, owning a large fleet of fire bombers? It was the usual way that most of us end up where we are, a series of unexpected and seemingly unrelated events that gave us a chance which we never expected to have. I wanted to dream and to build and to take risks and to either fail or succeed. The war years gave me a chance to join the Royal Canadian Air Force. I graduated in 1944 as a pilot officer, bomb aimer, and look forward to being posting overseas. Unfortunately, my trip was not to be. The call coincided with the end of the war in 1945, and I never made that journey. After the war, I returned to Moose Jaw and obtained my pilot's license at Tiger Moth. From the moment I sold on that aircraft, I knew that my life was about to change dramatically. In 1947, I decided to start an aviation business. I borrowed some money and used my wartime veterans allowances and bought a brand new Cessna 120 for $2,945. That's the truth, $2,945, 1947. I arrived in Wichita, Kansas with about 20 hours in my pilot logbook, and I remember perhaps one of the fondest memories of my life was walking down the line of shiny new Cessna 120s and 140s and seeing my first aircraft, CF-ELM. I flew ELM back to Moose Jaw, and thus began my aviation career and the realization of my dream. With my new airplane, I quickly realized I had to earn some money to pay for it. I started by crop spraying and barnstorming for local sports days and country picnics over in the prairies around Moose Jaw, and to give paying customers a ride in my new aircraft. People in the late 1940s were thrilled for a chance to ride in an airplane, as most had never done so. I sold tickets for $3 for $10 a minute, $3 for a $3 for a 10-minute ride. Some days I made over $100. Years later, people would come up to me and say that was the first time they rode in an aircraft. It was when I gave them a ride in ELM on the sports day. In the fall of 1947, I got a job hauling fish out of Primrose Lake in northern Alberta. I purchased a new set of skis for my aircraft and headed north. Unfortunately, after a few months of frigid temperatures, sleeping on the floor in a big log cabin under a bearskin rug and eating pancakes fried in bear grease for breakfast, I decided the lifestyle was not for me. After Primrose Lake, I ended up in Cold Lake, Alberta for more than 10 years. During that time, I flew trappers to outlying trap lines, doctors to Indian reservations, 6 people to hospital, fishermen and their fish, as well as all kinds of general charter work. I had the only aircraft at that time in northeastern Alberta, so I flew a lot of hours. I flew my aircraft on floats in the summer and skis in the winter, in good weather and in bad. I can tell you hundreds of stories of people in the north, friends I met, and friends I lost in the north, plus incredible stories of aviation incidents, both lucky and sad. In the spring of 1950, a Transport Canada engineer phoned me and said they would like to charter my aircraft to look for a bombing and gunnery range, as well as an airport location. I flew them around the proposed range, and on my suggestion, I located the present Cold Lake Air Base where it is today. I like to think I had a hand in the establishment of a base in Alberta at Cold Lake. After the base opened in 1955, there was no more work for me to do in Cold Lake. I left for the distant early warning line, or the DEW line, in my 12-passenger Anson 5. I flew construction workers, mail, and parts from and to from the main base in Cambridge Bay. Those days were spent sleeping in a tent at Cambridge Bay in the Arctic Circle in winter and flying mostly at night. After my experience in the DEW line, I ended up in Edmonton, Alberta. I always kept my ears open for aviation opportunity. Opportunity walked in the door one day in 1969 when a fellow approached me and asked if I was interested in becoming a partner in a firebombing business named Airspray. He had a contract with the Alberta government doing forest firebombing. The plan was to use an old Korean War B-26 water bomber and a Cessna 310 Bird Dog, or a spotter aircraft, for the fire season. At the prospect of the thrill of forest firebombing, I of course jumped at the opportunity. The first season went pretty well, and I convinced the fellow to sell the other half of the business the next year. From there on, I had more B-26s and got contracts for forest fire suppression in the Yukon and British Columbia. I moved the main operation from Edmonton to Red Deer aircraft for the forest fire suppression with the... Anyway, I got to Red Deer, and I got into the idea of a bigger airplane, so I obtained a 4-engine Lockheed Electra L1E8 and also amphibious Canadair 215 aircraft. And we started using Turbo Commander aircraft for bird dogs and even tried a few seasons with a Cessna Citation jet as a bird dog. I guess you could say that I always looked for new aircraft that would improve the industry both in terms of efficiency and safety. A few months ago, I was nominated to the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame. I'm deeply honored, and at the same time, I'm deeply humble. I have spent my life barnstorming on the prairies, flying in the remote lakes of the north, patrolling the high Arctic, and running a company that has dropped retardant on fires from the Northwest Territories, Yukon, to Ontario and back into British Columbia and Alberta. And oh yes, even in Turkey. So I guess you could say I've covered a lot of territory since 1947. I also think back on all the places I have been in the world, purchasing aircraft and all the great people I have met in the aviation industry here in Canada and around the world. It has been a great journey. In the end, I hope at the end of the day, I've done something to improve aviation in Canada. Every so often, I will meet someone who will meet me and say, "I remember when you flew me," and proceed to tell me about the event. These days, I don't remember them all, but the stories made me proud that in some way, my passion for aviation did some good or made someone happy. And so now I would borrow a quote from the famous baseball Lou Gehrig, who said a few days before he died, "I can tell you that today I'm the luckiest man in the world. So today I can tell you today that I think I'm the luckiest pilot in the world." Thank you.
Quite the story. Well, writer, illustrator, recorder of our aviation history. Here's a look at William J. Wheeler.
A founding member of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society, Bill Wheeler served as editor of the CAHS Journal for 45 years with tireless effort and dedication to the Society. His work resulted in the publication of a respected magazine that carried articles, photographs, and art in a comprehensive portrayal of many diverse aspects of Canadian aviation history. By the time he was 12 years old, Bill Wheeler had become fascinated by airplanes and aviation. And by the time he graduated from Port Arthur Collegiate in 1953, Bill had developed a serious interest in art, pursuing his passion by enrolling at the Ontario College of Art in 1954, earning his diploma, ready to start a career. In 1955, Bill illustrated his first book, The Map Maker by Kerry Wood, the story of explorer David Thompson in a Canadian history series published by Macmillan of Canada. And in 1958, Bill illustrated his first book about aviation, Knights of the Air by John Norman Harris, another book in Macmillan's series of great stories of Canada. And Bill was now on a path he would follow for 50 years in publishing stories about Canadian aviation. Aviation history had become a serious pursuit for Bill, and he found his interest was shared by fellow enthusiasts. By the 1960s, Bill was a family man, and his talents as an artist and a teacher were developing as his career progressed. Completing a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Toronto and taking a position as art teacher for the Scarborough Board of Education. And in 1962, he became a founding member of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society, doing his best to attract new members. Within a year, the Society was publishing the CAHS Journal, and Bill Wheeler was serving as editor, providing his own artwork to illustrate some covers of the magazine and the stories it carried. The journal recorded stories of Canadian aviation history for a growing readership that would eventually see the Society establish a dozen chapters across Canada. Under Bill's direction, the journal would become a respected quarterly magazine that carried articles, first-person accounts, art, and photographs, providing a published record of aviation in Canada. And in 1966, Bill still found time to illustrate another book about Aviation Hall of Fame member Wap May. Into the 1970s, the journal continued to improve in appearance and layout, with great stories about those who made aviation history. And Bill was able to recruit outstanding artists to illustrate magazine covers. Artists like Jim Bruce, Peter Mossman, Tom Bjarnason, and Hall of Fame member Robert Bradford. Aviators like Hall of Fame member Louis Lee contributed articles, and in 1978, the Canadian Aviation Historical Society marked 15 years of publishing, while the magazine's editor continued teaching as head of the art department at his high school. By the 1980s, color was starting to appear in the journal, seen in these covers by Tom Bjarnason and Robert Bradford, and in this cover feature showing Hall of Famer Vi Milstead Warren flying a Fairchild Husky on floats. Well established as an aviation magazine, the journal continued to carry cover art based on stories told from first-hand experience. Bill Wheeler produced 4 issues of the magazine per year and spent time with fellow enthusiasts to hear and gather their stories. In 1984, CAHS published a special issue about Canada's warplane heritage, featuring a cover painting of the Mynarski Lancaster by Robert Curry. Important events continue to appear in the magazine, such as this article about the search for the Corsair, in which Hall of Famer Robert Hampton Gray, V.C., lost his life in the Second World War, and the 60th anniversary story of the RCAF by publisher and member of the Hall of Fame, Larry Milbury. The story of Hollinger on Gava Transport was told by Wes McIntosh, who served as chief pilot for the airline. Color covers had become the standard by the late 1980s, as the CAHS now marked 25 years of publishing success. The journal continued its tradition of recording stories from all facets of our heritage, from civil and military aviation, from Air Force and bush flying. No aspect was ignored. In the 1990s, color had become the standard in cover illustrations as the magazine reached its 30th year. And Bill Wheeler was portrayed as an aviator himself in a painting by Tom Bjarnason in a 60th birthday present for the editor. Bill continued to be active in the Canadian Aviation Historical Society, attending conferences of the CAHS, and always open to stories which he would elicit for the magazine to share with its readers. In 2000, he published Skippers of the Sky, a collection of stories about bush flying, which had appeared first in the journal. And in 2001, Bill's contribution to the Canadian Aviation Historical Society was instrumental in the Society being honoured with the Belt of Orion Award for Excellence from Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Bill left his editor's chair in 2008 after serving as editor for 45 years, and in 2009 edited a special publication of Flypast for the Toronto chapter of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society to celebrate Canada's centennial of flight. Bill and his wife Pat met while attending the Ontario College of Art, and in 2011 they will mark 55 years of marriage.
Well, for 45 years, Bill Wheeler of Markham, Ontario, has served the Canadian Aviation Historical Society as editor and illustrator of CAHS Journal. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome William J. Wheeler.
When Father John was mentioned, Father John McGillivray, actually he wasn't mentioned, but his Airman's Grace was. And he first delivered that grace at one of our convention banquets. I think the members here Chris Terry back there would probably corroborate this. I feel both flattered and gratified at being accepted into such a respected institution as Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. To say that I was surprised when John Chalmers and George Topple advised me that I was to be inducted as a member would be putting it kind of mildly. But now that I've come to grips with this unexpected honor, I'd like to thank the people who made it all possible.